God of Trash, Cultivation LitRPG, From Trash Tier to the Ultimate Trash. Book 4 complete. By author Noct. Chapter 247 to 256. Let's go get him, boy. The men charged, and Rhys lounged. From all directions, men raced toward him, drawing swords, axes, hammers, or even firing strange magics toward him and his skelly boy. He lazed in their midst, supremely unconcerned even as the weapons and magics closed in on him. As the first man reached him, Rhys lazily reached out and tapped the flat of the sword hurtling toward him. To the man, it looked like just a tap, but Rhys forcibly imbued the maximum dosage of impurities in that single moment. The sword shattered. 1,000 razor-sharp shards of metal flew in all directions. Rhys flicked his fingers, manipulating them to blast the sword wielder in the face instead. The impurities he'd forced into the shards squeezed off in the man's wounds, leaving him with a buckshot blast of his own sword and a body full of impurities. He trembled, then hit the floor, convulsing to his death. He pointed at the hands, the ones caging in who was presumably the leader, and the hands bore downward, pressing the man to the floor. One of the underlings shrieked in horror and ran to their leader's rescue, only for the hands to vanish just long enough to capture the underling, too. Both underling and leader were held prone on the ground, unable to break free. Rhys left them to their struggles and turned back to the battlefield. A man with a hammer swung toward the back of the skeleton's head, only for the skeleton to spin its skull around a full 180 degrees and catch the hammer in its teeth. Rhys imbued it with a surge of Tier 4 power, and the skeleton slammed its teeth shut, shattering the hammer. A glowing ermine, lit up in bright red, leapt nimbly up the skeleton and went for Rhys's throat. I know a professor who'd be very excited to see this, Rhys thought, as he caught it out of the air. The construct struggled in his hands, until he injected it with impurities. Then it sagged, on the verge of death. Rhys clenched his hand, meaning to kill the construct, then thought again. He delved into the depths of the spell, which he now owned, thanks to the thick impurities blackening the once red ermine, and sought out its control mechanisms. Time seemed to slow as he focused all his attention and energy on this one object. Most of the spell was complicated mana channels, shaping, and intent he didn't understand, but the control mechanism was clear enough, a powerful tether of mana going back to one of the attackers. Rhys went to cut it off, then had an even better idea. He hijacked it and forced it to flow backward with his superior force of mana, and then, as the mage on the other end stopped in his tracks and spat blood, he forced a glob of impurities through the link. The mage's eyes widened, and he tried to cut off the link, but Rhys was now fully in control of it, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Impurities slammed into his body, blackening his veins and corrupting his flesh, and he crumpled slowly as they tore through him. Now in full control of the ermine projection, Rhys sent it forth. It leapt out just as the man with the axe reached him and clawed its way up the man's arm to its throat, leaving behind little impure footprints the whole way. The man batted at his body, his eyes widening, and Rhys saw exactly why the ermine user had been using an ermine. The little, lithe body easily whirled around the man's arm, evading his clumsy strikes, and the tiny thing was on his body, well inside the strike range of his axe, so he couldn't bring his primary weapon to bear on the now black ermine. And then it crawled into the throat it had torn open and kept tearing, all the way inside the man's body, and Rhys stared on in horror. Holy shit, I didn't know it would do that. I'm sorry, man, I just hijacked this thing, I didn't know it was going to eviscerate you from within. While the ermine wriggled around inside the man, biting and clawing and tearing, and the man screamed in pain and horror, batting at the lump of spell inside him, Rhys turned to the remaining men, only to find them retreating at speed. He frowned. Hey, hey, hey. Who tried to set a trap on who, huh? Get back here. Gesturing, he ordered the skeleton to stop them in their tracks. The skeleton lifted its foot and stomped. A ridge of bones pierced through the earth from its stomp, chasing after the men. When it reached them, it jabbed up through their feet, tearing their feet and ankles to bits. The men screamed and fell over, crawling away, only for the bone spurs to now tear into their entire bodies. The skeleton's eyes glowed, and the spurs retracted toward Rhys, pulling the men in with them. Rhys raised his brows. Huh, I'm learning so much right now. He hadn't known the skeleton could do that, either. He was mostly a physical or impurities fighter, which meant he hadn't really explored the limits of his curses or spell projections before. But now, he was kind of thinking he wanted to exactly that. He whirled his hand, recalling the ermine from the ruined body of the axe wielder. Extending his legs at last, he climbed out of the skeleton's hold and walked over to the cage of bones and looked down at the leader and underling. The black ermine crouched on his hand, gazing down at them with glittering obsidian button eyes. Smiling pleasantly, he tossed them a nod as though he were a friendly neighbor. "Hello. Would either of you like to tell me who sent you here, what the purpose of the filth pillar was, and why you attacked me when I destroyed it?" The underling bared his teeth in defiance. "You'll never hear me." Rhys gave a silent command, and the ermine burst forth. It swooped into the underling's mouth and started doing what it did best. The underling screamed until he couldn't anymore, and then he just thrashed silently in pain. He looked at the leader and smiled. "What about you?" The leader narrowed his eyes and said nothing. There's potential there, but I bet he won't speak while his men live." The men were devoted to the leader's cause, whatever it was, but the leader was the cause. With the leader around, the men were less likely to talk. Conversely, with the men around, the leader wouldn't talk. But without the men, the leader was just a man, and he was pretty sure the leader would buckle to save himself. He hadn't at all reacted to his underling's death, after all, even though the underling had thrown himself into a curse to save the leader. Devotion flowed one way in this gang of thieves. The underling finally struggled his last, and Rhys recalled the ermine. It hopped up his robes and snuggled to his neck, cuddling against his chin. He petted it, very pleased with the little construct. "Maybe I'll just take this. I mean, it's not like its owner is using it anymore, right? So it's mine now. I just have to figure out how to keep it around." Magical constructs usually didn't last more than a few moments. He'd been constantly feeding it mana to keep it from fading, and it wasn't like he could keep doing that forever. The real answer was to learn the technique that summoned the construct, but he didn't feel like doing that. He was all about the lazy, trashy way to accomplish things, and actually learning a technique wasn't lazy or trashy at all. He walked over to the mages caught in the skeleton's bone spurs. "Any of you feel like talking?" "Never. We'll die first," one of them shouted. Rhys freed the ermine, granting that man his wish. The other two men looked a little less certain, as blood and gore splattered over them from the ermine's hard work, and their fellow man screamed and convulsed beside them. He turned to them. "Well, do you two also want to die? Or do you feel like talking?" One of the remaining two men scoffed defiantly. "Your weapon is bound up in him. I'm not going to." "Shish, shish." Rhys crouched, putting a hand over his face. He emitted impure smoke from his hand from the wildly burning trash star and forced it into the man's eyes, nose, and mouth. The man choked, then coughed and spat, but he couldn't force the smoke out of his body. It swirled into his mana core and corrupted the mana whirling there, slowing and gunking up his internal workings until they all fell apart. Blood spurted from his orifices, and he choked on the blood and smoke together until he died. He turned to the final man, shaking his head a little. "You worked hard to reach Tier 3. I know how impressive an achievement that is. Do you really want to throw that all away?" The man gritted his teeth. He shot a look at their leader, still trapped under the bone claw. I won't give anything up." Rhys snapped his fingers. The ermine burst out of the current man's stomach and dashed across to the remaining man. The man screamed in horror. He raised his hands, but to no avail. The ermine dug into his stomach and burrowed inside, leaving a pile of pink gore behind it. He screamed louder, clawing at his stomach and even attacking it with magic in an attempt to rout the ermine, but the ermine dug on, with Rhys's magical assistance. At last, the man's eyes rolled back and he went limp. The ermine reappeared out of his mouth, shaking its little head cutely, then hopping over to Rhys's side. Since it was a magical projection in the first place, it didn't actually have any fur, so it remained completely clean and gore-free, even if it left black and red footprints of impure blood behind it all the way until Rhys picked it up. "Come here, cutie." He petted the ermine's head as he walked back over to the leader. He crouched down so he was closer to the man's eye level. "I'll never say anything," the man hissed through gritted teeth, glaring daggers at Rhys. Rhys sighed. He shook his head. "It's okay, my friend. You don't need to pretend anymore. None of your men are alive. You can be the coward you know you are. Between you and me, I saw it from the first moment you charged. You're pretending. Pretending so your men don't see your weakness. But now they're all dead, so you and me, we can be our honest selves with each other. Fuck off." "Okay." Rhys held the ermine forward. It leapt down his arm toward the man, its little dark eyes glittering in excitement. Wait, I'll talk. Rhys called the ermine back. It chittered in disappointment and climbed back up to nestle on his shoulder. The man sighed, then opened his mouth. Energy suddenly churned within him as he pointed his energy at itself, trying to self-destruct. Rhys slammed his hand down. He pushed impurities into the man, clogging up his mana passages and core with thick, gooey gunk. The rioting energy within the man was forced to slow, and the self-destruct aborted. The man's eyes widened. True panic appeared on his face. Every escape route had been cut off from him now. It was just him, Rhys, and the ermine. Rhys lifted his hand off the man's face and smiled sweetly again. So, want to cut the bullshit and talk? Or should I just let my friend do what he does best? The ermine chittered in excitement, darting back and forth on Rhys's shoulder. The man stared. The man licked his lips, then snarled. Damn it. This is all that idiot Blanc's fault, and now he's dead, anyways, so why did I even bother? Yeah, why did you bother? Rhys asked. The man gripped his robes and pulled them down, showing Rhys his neck. A small mark stood there, the same as Bast's in both appearance and aura. There. That should tell you everything you need to know, right? Rhys's eyes widened. He sucked in a breath. Oh, the Alliance was behind this. Specifically that Virgil loser who'd gone around marking everyone. It didn't answer why they'd put down a filth pillar in a random sect, but it at least answered who. Right, so leave me alone. We never wanted this job, anyways. Got forced into it by that asshole, he finished at a grumble, as the mark's mana suddenly surged. Hold on, I think I can remove that mark. You think? I haven't tried it yet. But I was going to kill you anyways, and you've told me everything I need to know, so you sound like perfect fodder. Rhys replied cheerfully. Before the man could protest, he reached out and touched the mark. The mark was complex, full of mana circuits even denser and tighter than the ermine construct. But this time, Rhys wasn't trying to preserve or keep it in any way. He slammed impurities into it, filling it with filth so it couldn't function, the same as he'd done to the man's mana systems. The mark slowed to a halt, but then, abruptly, the entire thing shuddered. Mana surged again, stronger than ever before. Rhys tried to stop it, but it was so overwhelmingly pure and strong that he couldn't contaminate it in time. He leapt back, releasing the skeletal hands at the same time. What did you do? Get back. Before the man could even finish jumping to his feet, the energy that had gathered in the mark exploded, cutting his head clean off. He dropped like a puppet with its strings cut, his body hitting the ground moments later. Rhys grimaced. Well, guess brute force isn't going to work. At least he'd found it out on this guy, not Bast. He knelt, absorbing the body back into his core, then wandered the battleground, sucking up the blackguards, bodies one by one. As Rhys cleaned up, the weaker mages came out from where they'd been hiding. Slowly, they approached the square, looking around with bright eyes like little forest animals coming out from their dens after a long rain. In the center of the square, the old man sighed in relief. Rhys cleaned up the last body before walking over to him. So, I take it the ambush wasn't your idea. No, not at all, benefactor. I am the schoolmaster of this school, or was, back when it was still functional. Not long ago, that man, he winced, touching his neck, and changed his wording. Those men attacked our school and installed that pillar. We were powerless to stop them. I truly have no idea what their purpose was, but we know we were not alone in our fate. No. The other schools around us also had pillars installed in them. We used to be known as the 4 cardinal schools, north, south, east and west, but now we are nothing but hosts for those pillars. I dare not guess for what purpose they were installed. He gave Rhys a look. Rhys raised his brows. The man kept making very pointed statements about the pillars' purpose, which suggested he knew exactly what it was, but just couldn't say thanks to whatever compulsion the mark put him under. He nodded slowly, thinking about it. North, south, east, and west. 4 directions. In a lot of his trashy novels, putting something, or rather, the same thing in 4 different directions would make a seal or formation of some description. In other words, the filth pillars were probably sealing something in the center of these 4 schools. And it's something Virgil wants sealed. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that it's something I want unsealed. It was time to go find those other 3 pillars and absorb them, too, then unlock whatever Virgil had sealed away. He didn't know what it was, or why he'd sealed it, but as long as Virgil wanted it gone, Rhys wanted it back. Was it petty as hell? Yes. Was he going to do it? Also yes. Interesting. I think I'll go investigate these other 3 schools. Should I expect a warm welcome? The old man blinked, then realized what Rhys was saying and nodded. Yes, yes. A warm welcome, just like you received here. Understood. He paused, then cleared his throat. My name is Ergen Roster. I, and the entire West Cardinal School, owe you a great debt. I cannot repay it right now, given the state of my school, but if you were to come back another time, I would happily give you your due. Ah, no worries. I benefited plenty as it is. Unless, no, wait. I do want a reward, Rhys said, remembering his goal of taking down the Alliance. He'd need manpower, or at least, how about you owe me a favor for now? Ergen bowed his head, accepting it. And if I figure out how to remove those marks, I'll come back and take care of yours, Rhys promised. Ah, that could be a problem for me. You don't want the mark removed. Rhys glanced around him at the bloodstains on the stone. But if that's the case, aren't you already in trouble? A bunch of rowdy mercenaries infighting. That won't put me in trouble at all, Ergen said, waving his hand. The rest was left unsaid, but someone able to remove marks would be deeply interesting to whoever put marks on people. Rhys nodded slowly, understanding. Right. I didn't think through the entire scenario, but he's right. I can't go around removing marks willy-nilly. If I remove one, I should destroy the evidence. Not that that was going to be hard, if he had a warm welcome to expect at the other 3 sects. Plenty of fodder to test his mark breaking on. Even if Ergen didn't want his mark removed, Rhys was still determined to remove Bast's. Bast had all but asked for his to be removed, and if there was going to be some kind of negative social reaction to Bast losing the mark, Rhys would just kick everyone who was causing problems out of the way, or take Bast somewhere where there wouldn't be any problems. Huh. Back in the day, I relied on Bast to protect me, but now, I'm the one protecting Bast. He couldn't imagine that Bast had hit tier 4 this fast. Someone was sabotaging him, after all, by harming the Sword Saint, and Rhys had gone and absorbed an entire empire's worth of impurities to help level up super fast. Once he got Bast out of this situation and back on track, he was pretty sure the man would outpace him again, but for now, poor Bast was stuck in a rut. He turned to the students remaining in the school. Is everyone alright? This old man isn't lying to me. I'll kill him if he is, I swear. All the mages immediately started shaking their heads hard. A few jolted or paled, terrified. Alright, I just had to make sure, Rhys said, putting his hands up. He nodded at Ergen. You understand. I would prefer that you hadn't done it in front of me, but I do understand your purpose in being obnoxious. Huh. I knew you weren't afraid of me, old man. Ergen shrugged. I can do little to keep you from killing me. If you wanted me dead, I would be dead already. Why fear what I cannot prevent? Damn, you're even worse off than some friends I knew back in home. You're alright, old man. Anyone with end-stage fatalism was alright by Rhys. If nothing else, they were at least not annoying like little children, with their hopes and dreams and shiny eyes, all full of life, who were constantly and continuously let down by the real world, and had to be annoyingly babied non-stop, or maybe that was just his one annoying young coworker, but in any case, he preferred fatalists to whatever the opposite of fatalism was. Believing in your dreams, he turned toward the other schools. If you had to pick, where should I go second? If you can say. Ergen turned to face the schools as well. He considered for a second, stroking his beard, then pointed. East. Opposite us. If there was a seal, or formation of some kind, then you would want to take down the opposing side to prevent the seal from backlashing and destroying what was sealed. I don't want to destroy what's sealed. I assumed you came here to unseal it. Rhys considered. I didn't not come here to unseal it. Then I would proceed across to the Eastern Cardinal School. Rhys saluted. Thanks, old man. Don't mention it. Rhys started to walk off, then turned back over his shoulder. The skeleton mount stood there, rigidly standing where he'd left it. Why walk, when he could lounge there in style? He whistled. The skeleton walked over, its arms outstretched. He hopped up, and the skeleton walked off, carrying him down the mountain and off toward the next mountain. The mysterious stranger left without leaving so much as a name, demanding even the most powerful of curses at his whim. His ease at forcing the bloodthirsty cursed creature to do even the simplest tasks spoke to his incredible mastery and fearful control of undead beings. Ergen hadn't felt fear in a long time, but standing next to that man, he couldn't help but feel afraid. One of the students scurried over to Ergen. "Sir, was that a demon?" Ergen smacked her on the shoulder. "Don't be rude to our savior." The student gazed at him silently. "I can't tell you. I'm wondering the same thing," Ergen muttered to himself, watching Rhys walk away. Rhys left the first peak behind and headed toward the second one. His trash star was still burning hot, but it was slowly burning less hot. He still wished he'd had to exert a little more energy to fight the men, but, well, he couldn't style on them and work hard at the same time, so he'd just have to push his limits a little more at the next pillar, or maybe defeat all the men and then double back to absorb the pillars. He didn't have to do both simultaneously. He could do whatever he wanted in whatever order he wanted. Defeating one peak's men didn't mean he had to absorb that pillar. "We'll see how things go and play it by ear." He lounged in the skeleton's arms, making no effort to burn off that energy he needed to burn and instead sitting around like a fat ass and enjoying his life, in true trash fashion. Knowing what he needed to do and putting it off until a later date anyways, what a rare luxury in this new life of his. That used to be a Tuesday evening, now it was a lucky, rarely empty day that he got to put off the things he needed to do until later. Mostly because if he didn't do the things he needed to do now with magic, he would die, usually. This was the rare situation where he could procrastinate, and that rarity was exactly what made his procrastination feel so good. He yawned, glancing up at his skeleton mount. "Do you think they'll believe me if I say, we come in peace?" The skeleton walked on, stoic as always. "Nah, I didn't think so." He paused. "But it'd be funny." It wasn't true, either, but he was deep in his stunt on the losers era, which coincidentally was also an era a certain fast pop star had. Was still having. He wasn't sure. He didn't keep that close an eye on her, beyond what the radio force fed him no matter what channel he flipped to. How one pop star managed to qualify as everything from country to pop to techno to alt-rock somehow to oldies was beyond him. But damn did he wish she could choose one genre to not infiltrate so he could get away from her. Taking all top 10 slots on the pop charts was whatever, he could just leave the pop channel, except he couldn't. He couldn't escape. That fast pop star was too quick for him, she was inescapable. She hadn't managed to make inroads on K or J pop yet, but it was only a matter of time, and he didn't know if he could make the swap to C pop. Tonal languages made for interesting pop songs, since the words themselves required twists on the notes in the song so that the proper meaning got across, and he could enjoy one on occasion, but the tonal angle made the songs a little harder a listen than the smooth melodies he associated with K or J pop. Then again, I'm pretty sure C pop has enough money to lure her, once K pop inevitably gets her. He sighed, then brightened up. He had escaped her at last. There was no radio here, so there was no way his life could get blasted with the same song for the 79,000th time. Honestly, he didn't even dislike her music that much, it was just way overplayed. And inescapable. "You seem a man beset by his moods," a voice intoned. Rhys gestured for the skeleton to stop and glanced up, looking at the figure sitting in the tree over him. "Yeah, a bit. Lovesick. More like glad that we're never, ever, getting back together," Rhys told him. The man stared. "Anyways, are you here to stop me?" "I might be. Are you proceeding toward the peak?" "Yep. Do you want to fight, or are you contractually obligated to fight?" Rhys pointed at his neck, where the mark had been on the other fighters. The man raised his brows. "That may be the case. Because I'm looking for guinea pig, willing and friendly research subjects to take part in my very legitimate and safe medical trial on removing mana marks." The man's brows shot even higher. "You can do that. I've got inroads on what works," Rhys said, by which he meant, "I know one method that doesn't work." The man considered for a long time, then lifted his hand. "Wait here. I'll be back." Rhys nodded and settled in. He didn't really care if the man tried to ambush or trap him. He could literally fight these guys lying down, and he'd be quite happy to do it again. But if the guy came back with his underlings, and they all lined up to get their marks removed, well, Rhys wasn't about to turn down free money. Besides, if they were forced into this situation by some kind of magical compulsion, he felt a little bad about killing them. Not the Western Peak guys, those had seemed to be oppressing the actual Peak students, which pissed him off enough that he wanted to kill them, mark or no. But these guys seemed a little more reasonable. Of course, he hadn't seen what this Peak students looked like, so maybe they were oppressed, too, but at the same time, he didn't think all 4 Peaks would have an identical situation. Virgil didn't seem the type to worry too hard about what kind of mooks he recruited. A wandering group of rogue adventurers and a pack of bandits probably looked the same to him, but would have deeply different moral codes and therefore, deeply different moral compunctions to slaughtering them. Now, Rhys was in a slaughtering mood, so he wasn't too caught up on moral compunctions, but he was all for giving people an easy out that also benefited him. If he didn't have to get off his rear end to pass this test, all the better. Not that he'd gotten off his rear to defeat the last set, but that was neither here nor there. Before long, the man returned with a cadre of similarly dressed mages. They were all wearing black and green mages, robes, and though they were a bit dirty and torn, they were all uniform. Rather than adventurers, they looked more like a fallen mage school of some description. Maybe even the Eastern Cardinal School itself, though Rhys wasn't ready to make that conclusion without more evidence. The Western branch hadn't had uniforms, but then, were they all branches of the same school, or were they just 4 unrelated collocated schools? Who knew? Not Rhys. Maybe I'll ask these guys. They seemed like the kind of people who would know. But first, so, hey, are you guys here to fight, or are you here to be my test, to get the marks removed? The mages looked amongst themselves. 1 or 2 looked at the first man who Rhys had encountered with uncertainty. He gets 1 chance. If he can't do it, then we attack, the first man said, crossing his arms. Whoa, hey. 1 chance. I never said I could do it off the kick. 2, no, 3 chances. At least 3. The man narrowed his eyes. 1 chance. Rhys sighed dramatically. All right, who's the lucky guy, huh? Step forward, and let's get this over with. If they weren't going to be his willing guinea pigs, they'd just have to be his unwilling guinea pigs. Either way lead to the same result, there'd just be a little more struggling beforehand one way versus the other. He paused. Am I the baddie? No, they're the baddies. I'm justified in doing great work advancing science and medicine to save my friend. He nodded, smiling. The mages murmured amongst themselves. They kept casting uncertain looks at Rhys, and their leader, or at least, the man Rhys had first spoken to, kept shaking his head. At last, a woman threw her hands up and stepped forward. I'm tired of being under that asshole's control. Take it off or kill me, either way, I'm out of this hell. That's the attitude we're looking for. I mean, ahem, Rhys added, as the others shot sharp looks his way, thank you for putting your trust in me, ma'am. I'll do my best. She gestured. Should I sit? Are you going to stand? Oh, that's right. Hold on. Rhys climbed reluctantly to his feet. He didn't dismiss the skelly boy, since he had a strong feeling that he'd need it in the near future. People didn't tend to stand still when they were in extreme pain, and she was at least mid-tier 3. Reaching into his specially designated pile of useful trash, he drew out a table and manifested it, then patted it. Sit, lie down, whatever makes you feel comfy. She gave the dinner table an uncertain look, but sat down on it. The glittering blue light held her weight easily. She patted the surface, frowning a little. What is this? It feels like intent. It is intent. Killing, weapon, but it's a table, she murmured. Rhys coughed. Now wasn't the time for her to be figuring out his techniques and path. If he needed to kill them, it was better if they had no idea what he could do, not even a hint. Hey, let's focus on the task at hand. Flow your mana steadily and normally, and don't try to fight what I do to you. These marks can explode when provoked, so we'll need to cooperate here. Let me know if it feels like you're about to explode. Wait, explode? She asked, alarmed. Yeah, so make sure you let me know if you feel like exploding, okay? Before she could protest or jump up, Rhys clasped her shoulder, pinning her down, and focused all his attention on the mark. The woman stilled as she felt his mana surround the mark. To her credit, she didn't fight, even though Rhys probably would have fought if he'd just heard his neck might explode very soon. Then again, it's not like I told her what makes it explode. For all she knew, standing very Very still was the only way to make it out alive. He examined the mark slowly, taking his time now that he needed to care whether she lived or died, even if only a little. It felt much like the first mark. The same complex mana circuits, the same flavor of mana, or whatever he should call that. Aura. It felt the same, that was the point. Whoever had made the first, and this, and Bast's mark, they were all the same person with the same mana signature. Before he attacked it, though, he spent more time examining it. Somewhere was the dead man's switch that exploded when the mark was interfered with. He needed to destroy those mana circuits first before he tried to mess around with the mark. But how do I find them? They're only going to light up when they're activated. He thought for a moment, then cut a look at the other mages. He hesitated for a second, then shrugged to himself. Science is built on sacrifices. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Here we go. Rhys deliberately tripped his impurities over a line of the mana circuit, killing it. He held his breath, waiting for the dead man's switch to activate. Nothing happened. The mark remained the same as ever. He frowned. I guess it's got a bit of tolerance for breakages. Then again, if it didn't, with circuitry this fine, it'd be blowing up mages left and right whenever they got in a battle and took a blow to the neck. Still, it was interesting that it did have a tolerance. It meant that he wouldn't be fighting all these mages quite as fast as he initially thought he was going to be. Okay, now that I know I can play around a little, let's try not to blow this girl's neck up right out the bat. It wasn't like he wanted to kill her, and certainly, he wanted to respect her bravery by volunteering to be his guinea pig. He didn't necessarily think it was realistic for him to try disarm this bomb, but he wasn't going to blow this shot, either. He was going to give it his very best take. Sure, he'd been a bit blasé from the beginning, but that was when he'd thought he didn't stand a single chance at disarming it without a big boom. Now that he knew, might as well use his chance properly. He immersed himself into the mana circuits, taking them in one at a time. He didn't know what any of them did, but by eroding them with impurities, he could at least get a feeling for which ones were vital, and which ones weren't. When occluding a circuit made the mark start gathering mana and heating up, he pulled back, noting it down in his mental map. At the same time, he tried to pinpoint which ones were triggering first to start the heat up and mana gathering, but it was difficult. Not only did the gathering start subtly, but the mark was parasitic, it constantly drew on the host's mana to power itself. It was always a little hot, and always gathering a little mana, and the places it started heating up from changed each time. Still, if he marked all of them, maybe he'd eventually be able to figure out what to cut off. That was his hope, anyways, even if he had no proof that it would work. That's what experimentation is all about. Or something. I didn't pay that much attention in science class after they stopped showing the magical school bus videos. If the mark was parasitic, though, that implied that it needed to be connected to the person's mana supply to survive, and that gave him an idea. He reached out, encapsulating the entire mark and cutting off its mana supply. Instantly, the mark tried to go supernova, drawing all the energy it could and heating up wildly. All around him, all the mages jumped to their feet. The leader extended his sword and put the blade at Rhys's neck. Hold on, I'm about to succeed here, idiots. Rhys ignored the threat, focusing on the mark. The mark sucked at the woman's mana, but it could only draw on the mana immediately around it. When it tried to pull the host's mana, it instead latched onto his impurities and drew them into itself, simultaneously canceling the self-destruct and clogging the entire mark's workings. The mark cooled, and Rhys drew a knife and decisively cut it free of the woman's neck. She jumped away, then blinked. She paused for a moment, working her jaw, then said, "That fucking snake Virgil put a mark on me." "It's off?" the leader asked, shocked. "Yep." Rhys fully corrupted the mark, turning it to dust, then absorbed it. More trash for the trash star. And, sorry about your sword. The man frowned. He tilted his blade to examine it better, only for the part that had touched Rhys's neck to crumble away, impurified to be so weak it broke on its own. Rhys dusted off his hands. "So, who's next?" The leader gestured for his men to step forward, while offering Rhys his hand. "I apologize for doubting you. My name is Magnus Ichthan, and I am deeply in your debt. Please remove the marks from my students. I alone will atone for my rude actions." "That's right. You owe me a big fat favor." Magnus blinked. You don't want to take my head?" "No. I don't gain anything from killing you, and I'm not that mad at you. Your actions were pretty reasonable for how high tension the situation was. And I never actually felt threatened by you, he added silently. That didn't need to be said, though. They both understood the difference in their power levels. Do you want me to remove your mark, too? Magnus hesitated. He touched the mark. I'm not sure. Mine is more complex than the rest of them. He might notice if you removed it. Oh, there's different types of marks. And some have a notification option. Interesting, interesting. Rhys nodded. I understand. I won't force you. It's your decision. Magnus nodded, stepping back with a thoughtful expression on his face. Rhys removed the mark of one student after another, corrupting and absorbing them afterwards. The students fell back when he was done, healing the small wound from him cutting it off with magic, skills, or salves. The rare mage who lacked a healing technique simply borrowed some salve from another student, or were healed by one of the mages with healing techniques. Rhys felt warmth in his heart, just seeing the scene, and he sighed. I'm glad we didn't fight. That would have been such a waste. This is much better. Plus, it adds to my manpower for my attack on the Alliance. He removed the final mark and stepped back. There we go. That's all the marks, right? Yes. All, keep mine, for now, Magnus said. Sure. Whatever you want. Hey, is there a pillar of filth on your peak? Magnus pressed his lips shut. He looked at one of his unmarked students, who stepped forward. Yes. I can show you where, if you want. I think I can find it on my own. It'll be good training, anyways. I take it Virgil left it. The student hesitated, then shook her head. No, there was someone else with him. Something else. Rhys raised his brows. Something else. Why do I feel like I might know what kind of thing that is? A remnant weapon. She jumped, then froze. Probably. That looks like a yes. It wasn't Sid. He doubted the mark would work on straw, since it was parasitic and straw was nothing but a bundle of cursed energy, but maybe Virgil had a cursed energy version of his mark. And of course, it could be another remnant weapon entirely. If Sid was associated with raw violence, and straw was cursed energy, then he could totally believe that Darren would build another weapon that was associated with filth and impurities. After all, as Rhys himself had discovered, impurities and curses were closely related. He glanced to the side. Darren wasn't visible right now, but he fully intended to ask the man when he found him again. He did have the Demon King right here, so he might as well use the resources he had. If anyone would know if there was a filth remnant weapon, it was the Demon King. I've got the whole walk to the peak to take things nice and slow and ask him lots of questions, Rhys thought, nodding. He'd even use one of his 3 questions, if he had to, though he was pretty sure Darren had forgotten about them, which only made him want to save them even longer to blindside the man with them as a face slap when Darren was least expecting it, and absolutely thought he was going to leave Rhys hanging and not answer his questions. Still, if that moment was now, then so be it. He nodded at the mages. Are you all the students? Or should I expect to encounter others on my way up the peak? No, we're all there is, Magnus said. If you encounter anyone else, they're unaffiliated with us. Come this way, and I'll open the barrier for you. Rhys nodded graciously, not mentioning that he could open the barrier by himself, thanks very much. It was the polite thing to do. Even though he could kids drink man through the wall, it was still good manners to use the door if it was opened for him. It wasn't a long walk to the edge of the barrier. Magnus had been waiting just outside its boundaries, presumably to ward off friends and fight off foes before the barrier came into the picture. He drew a token out of his robes and flashed it, and the barrier lit up gold, then faded. There. I've registered you with the barrier. You should be able to proceed through it now. Rhys nodded in thanks and did just that. Before long, Magnus and his students faded from view behind him, and there was nothing but the peaceful sway of leaves and the chirp of contented birds all around him. From this far out, he couldn't sense the filth pillar, but he pointed his feet towards the top of the peak. If it wasn't up there, then he'd have a better vantage point to sense it from atop the mountain. He turned to the air beside him. Hey, Darren. No reply. Duran. Darren. Dara. What? Gods, you're insufferable, Darren snapped, appearing beside him. Rhys laughed. You were an only child, weren't you? What's that got to do with anything? If you weren't an only child, you'd know. Hey, Darren. Did you build a remnant weapon themed around filth? Darren harumphed, drawing himself up to his full height. I didn't build any remnant weapons. That is a label attached after my untimely. Yeah, you know what I mean. So, filth. Yeah, there was a long pause. Darren stared at him, deeply irritated. For his part, Rhys knew what he'd done, so he put all his effort into walking, pretending that the moderate terrain took all his magely concentration. It was a nice peak, or at least, nicer than the West School. The paths were well kept despite being dirt, all the roots trimmed back and the underbrush kept free of the walkway. The few buildings were nice and neat, prim white buildings with square windows and open entrances. When he looked at the West Peak, it had been run down and poorly kept. There were signs of disuse and the negative effects of the squatters suppressing the peak's actual students. Here, though, it was all neat and shiny, clean and well kept, the peak clearly kept up. Rhys nodded, happy to see it. He didn't want to disbelieve Magnus's story, but he wasn't just going to believe someone who told him, "Oh yeah, we own this place, for sure," with no proof. Sure, Magnus had opened the barrier, but Rhys could open the barrier, so that wasn't much proof. At last, Darren sighed. Yes, I did. Knew it. What's his name? You assume it's a he. All the rest of 'em have been man. That's on you, not me. I didn't choose their genders. They did. You're acting like I control what a sack of bugs or stick of wheat thinks its reproductive organs are. If I had that much fine control, do you think I would have made Sid half as crazy, or Straw half as nurturing? I wanted weapons, not uncontrollable weirdos. I did my best, but I got what I got. Rhys sighed. He looked at Darren. All right, fine. What is his, her, or their name? He calls himself Soma. I fucking knew it. You made them all boys. It's not my fault. Shut up. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Rhys nodded at Darren. So, this Soma. He's filth-based. How do you make him? Trade secret. Oh, come on. Darren hit him with a deadpan stare. Of everyone I've met, you're the one who comes closest to qualifying to replicate my filth golem technique. I have no desire to teach you. But that's exactly why I want to learn. I know. But some techniques are better off lost, Darren said, gazing into infinity with a mysterious, yet solemn glint to his eye. You know, I get that. I respect that. And I'm invoking a question, Rhys said. This is not what the questions are for, Darren snapped. You don't get to decide that. You agreed to answer any question. I'm calling it in. How do you make Soma? I'm trying to be a better person. Consider my actions. Not spread dangerous techniques. But I'm such a great guy. Surely you can trust me. And if you don't, then you violated our agreement. Isn't that right, Darren? Darren the liar. No wonder they called you the Demon King. You can't be trusted, not even when you yourself promised you could be. It's not about that. It's about trying to do less evil, Darren grumbled. Try to do less evil by teaching your techniques to good people who can be trusted, like me. Plus, isn't post-death a little late to have a change of heart? Everyone already thinks you're the ultimate evil. What's a little more evil on the roster? Darren squinted at him. Are you trying to convince me you're good, and won't misuse my technique, or convince me that my reputation can't get worse, so there's no harm teaching an evil technique to someone who might misuse it? A little of column A little of column B. Really, man, I'm just working all the angles, because no matter how I look at it, there's no reason for you to hold back. I mean, hell, what's the chance I'll even use your technique? Pretty high. Sure, but you know. Who's gonna blame you for it? I learned it long after you died, and no one knows your ghost is haunting me. I'm the only one who's going to take the blame for whatever evil things I do with it. Right, because people won't notice that your filth golem is built exactly like Soma. Rhys shrugged. Once I meet him, I can investigate him in person and figure out how to build him anyways. He's close enough to my path that I'm almost guaranteed to at least gain an insight or two from him, and if I can't copy the exact technique you used, I'll at least get close enough that it'll look like I knew it anyways. If you think about it, all I'm doing is giving you a chance to influence how I build mine and what I do with them. Darren sighed. He crossed his arms. Even so. Well, at the end of the day, what we learned is that Darren doesn't honor his promises. Rhys sighed and shook his head in disbelief. I do. You are actively not honoring a promise right now. Darren's face twisted in anger, and then he sighed deeply. All right, damn it, I'll tell you. But you have to promise not to use it. That wasn't a condition of the questions. It's a new condition I'm adding right now. Darren doesn't honor his promises. He's a filthy liar and a cheat. Fine, damn it, I'll tell you. But it costs 2 questions. It's a big answer, after all. Rhys shrugged. Sure. It wasn't like he had plans for all 3 questions, and honestly, Darren could rightfully refuse to answer this question, since handing over his magical techniques hadn't been part of the deal. Giving pointers on concepts Rhys didn't fully comprehend was, but not handing over entire techniques. If Darren made good on his promise, it was definitely worth 2 questions. Plus, he'd already double-dipped on the questions to begin with, since he'd used the scenario in which he'd gained the questions to confirm that Darren didn't know about absolute existence. At this point, charging him 2 questions to teach him the technique to create soma felt more like, fair's fair, than a bad deal. Darren took a deep breath, then sighed. It's not that complicated, all told, that's why I didn't want to tell you. Gather a great deal of filth in one place. Like an impure well. Like 100 of those or more, concentrated into an egg the size of your head. Feed it mana and nurture it like a child. When one piece of filth gains sentience, wipe it away, over and over until it's the whole ball of filth that's gaining sentience, rather than one piece. He paused. That was to prevent the mistake I made with Straw, where he's essentially a glorified straw spirit with an amalgamation body and some deep-seated body dysphoria. He thinks he's a human, when he's physically a wheat straw. Rhys guessed, confused. He thinks he should inhabit a body made of many straws, when he, the single straw, ought to manifest a projection of a body like any normal spirit would. Like your friend, that disgusting book-stealing cat does. He doesn't build a body out of many cats, he just manifests a human form and walks boldly around like he owns every text in the world. Darren paused. Of course, he wouldn't be much of a cursed doll if he did that, so I encouraged him to see himself as an entire doll even though I knew he was just a single straw, but that's neither here nor there. Right, so the entire filth ball gains sentience as a ball of filth, Rhys prompted him. Correct. And then keep feeding it filth. The impure wells are partially my fault, some are generated from the shafts I drilled to reach the layer with the black goo. I often missed, but didn't realize the allure of a deep shaft with nothing in it to the average mage, and so they became impromptu garbage dumps, for some of them. Others existed well before my time, and some, the most common ones, are used to house pieces of one of my fiercest weapons, which were then filled in by soma. This guy? Rhys asked, summoning the skeleton. Darren nodded, though reluctance was written all over his face. Yes. Him. He's my mount, you know that. He carries me around. Darren looked like he'd sucked a sour lemon. I do know that. I hate it. Hey, the first time I encountered this guy, there was a figure in armor carrying a sword that emits the aura of the sun. Any idea who that is? No, I don't know who, Darren said, quickly mastering himself. Is that going to be a question? Rhys asked. Yes. Then let's leave it until after you finish making good on your promise for this one. Rhys nodded at him. Back to the topic at hand. Soma turned against you. Darren clicked his tongue. That filth didn't have the appreciation for trash that you do. He developed a taste for the finer things in life and ignored me when I told them they were diluting his perfectly poisonous body. The other side offered him an unending banquet of everything good in this world, and the weak-willed trash gave in. I wonder why, Rhys deadpanned. Man, what a puzzle. One side gives you trash, and the other side offers you luxuries. Oh man, which side would I choose? Okay, well, I'd pick the trash. But if I wasn't insane, I'd pick the luxuries. It's the obvious choice. Darren wrinkled his nose. The idiot. Going against your nature will gain you no benefits. He's likely weakened himself greatly since his days under me. Could he make that kind of filth pillar under you? There was a long pause. Rhys looked at Darren. Could he? No, Darren admitted at last. It seems as though he's found his own path. One that even the genius Demon King didn't foresee, Rhys teased him. Shut your mouth. I did my best, but my weapons were always unpredictable. The more powerful, the less predictable. In any case, have your guard up around Soma. Yeah, Darren nodded. More so than Sid, he may be the most dangerous weapon still free among the world today, that did not fall in the final battle with the Sword Saint. It's okay, Darren. You can say remnant weapon. We know what you mean. And you should not show him the least weakness or opening, lest he exploit it, Darren finished, giving no indication that he'd heard Rhys at all. Haven't you said remnant weapon before? Darren, you don't need more sticks up your ass. There's enough of 'em in there already. Darren squinted at him. What? Turn of phrase. I think it refers to sitting upright with a such stiff back that it looks like there's something propping you perfectly upright because you're so strict, but honestly. Not sure. Never really got it. Is it homophobic? Is it even sexually explicit? Is it some kind of Freudian anal retention thing, which is a whole can of worms in of itself? I never did my research, and now I never will. Rhys sighed, then paused. I hope it's not homophobic. I really don't know. Right, well. Darren cleared his throat. Usually I'd warn you about Soma's impurities and filth, but I think you know them well. Instead, I'll go ahead and give you a different warning. You've never fought anyone with anything close to your path before, have you? Rhys thought for a second, then shook his head. Nope. Do not engage him head-on in a struggle for dominance over filth. Not only will he win, but you are sorely unprepared for a conceptual level battle at the present moment. If two people with similar paths battle, and those paths are something other than straightforward, simple concepts like the path of the blade and so on, the battle can quickly escalate beyond the ordinary limits of battle. And though you may think yourself a master of filth, you have had neither the lifespan, the time, nor the depth of experience in filth that Soma has. Rhys nodded. Reasonable. You got it, boss. You, that easily. What am I supposed to say? Oh, no, I'm so good I can defeat the expert who specializes in exactly what I do, but he's been doing it for longer. That's stupid. It's like having a bachelor's degree fresh out of college and trying to outdo the guy who's been working on the project for 50 years. The guy knows more than you. Doesn't matter if he doesn't even have his high school diploma, if you go up against him, you're the one getting schooled. I mean, I'm trash, I get it, but I know my place. I can fight above my tier because most mages don't encounter trash or know how to deal with it. This Soma guy is a trash expert. He's probably got counters to my counters. He's probably working on some super meta that I haven't even thought of yet. I'm not gonna rock up to that guy and act like I'm king. Darren raised his brows. I didn't expect you to be so reasonable. What a shocking moment of clarity from you. Rhys scoffed. I'm reasonable all the time. You're the unreasonable one. The aura of filth caught his attention, and Rhys stopped in his tracks and turned. Over there. Leaving Darren behind, he beelined toward the sensation. Darren watched him go, folding his hands into his sleeves. I certainly hope he's so reasonable when he encounters Soma. It didn't take Rhys long to find the pillar. The aura it gave off was strong, and as long as he kept walking toward where it felt stronger, he was guaranteed to come across it. It wasn't even really training, since it was so easy. Whether he used the cursed energy sense, filth sense, or mana sense, it blazed like a beacon in his vision, calling to him. Darren had vanished again, probably to prevent Rhys from probing him more about how to create filth golems. Rhys already had enough information, to be fair, and he wasn't that interested in filth golems, at least, not until he met Soma, so he was fine with Darren escaping. Plus, he knew now that Darren was weak to childish pressure tactics, which was deeply valuable information. All he had to do was abandon his dignity and harass Darren like a little sibling, and the guy would ultimately cave to his desires. He wasn't going to do it around other people, but he spent a lot of time wandering through the wilds. There was plenty of time to be dignity-free around Darren and no one else. This pillar wasn't rooted in the headwaters of a mountain stream, but nonetheless, the land around it was still blackened and caked in filth. Rhys absorbed it as he walked, even though it only made him feel more and more bloated. At last, he stopped dead, a frown on his face. I'm full. He couldn't eat anymore. If he absorbed another grain of trash, his trash star was going to collapse under its own weight. Already, it was brushing the walls of his distended core space, and if it wasn't for the heat resistance training he'd beaten into those walls, he would have been in much greater distress than mild heartburn. He pinched his chin, thinking deeply. He needed something to burn off the energy. He'd tried fighting, and it had kind of worked, but he'd decided to stunt on the losers, and anyways, it wasn't that hard of a fight. Even if he'd climbed to his feet and tried, he still wouldn't have wasted that much energy. He needed something else. Something that took a metric ton of energy. Pill-making, or pushing the limits of his projection techniques and intent, or a new spell, something like that. But what? What could he do to waste a lot of energy? Something he'd just learned, maybe. He looked around him at all the filth, then inside him at all the energy, and nodded. I'm going to create a filth golem. I knew I should have made you promise not to use it, Darren muttered from nowhere. Rhys snorted. As if that would have stopped me. And that's why I didn't want to teach it to you in the first place. Come on, Darren. I'm the most trustworthy guy you know right now. Why not teach me your secret techniques? You're a floating voice in the void, and you're trying to convince me to revive you. If you teach me more and make me happy, aren't I more likely to revive you? Weren't you trying to convince me to be a better person? I was trying to convince you not to spend time around philosophers, not to convince you not to share your secrets. Those are totally different and unrelated goals. One of the philosophers' tenets was the free sharing of information. If you, oh, wow, philosophers are such cool guys. We should listen to their opinions. Freely share information, Darren. It's a great idea. Darren just sighed. I'm just not going to give it a consciousness. Then it can't build a funny personality. Yes, because that worked fantastic for me. Rhys waved his hand. If it gets too uppity, I can always absorb it. Oh, because that won't give it a funny personality. I'm not going to tell it that. That would be insane. Darren paused. He looked at Rhys. Do you know the other name people had for my weapons? Before they were remnant weapons. No. The Demon King's spawn. They called them my children. Rhys froze. He made a face. Oh, gross. Okay. That actually put me off making it. This is a serious, life-changing, what? What? Children are gross, man. I don't want kids. They shit and snot all over everything and get everyone sick, and you're responsible for them, and they suck up all your time and spit up vomit and filth all over everything, and you have to feed them and house them and stuff. Darren blinked at him. I was trying to impress upon you the gravity of what you were attempting. They don't begin as literal, human-style infants, no. Rhys perked up. Well, why didn't you say so? All right, filth golem back on the menu. What? Darren asked, totally whiplashed. If it's not a disgusting human infant, then it's a cute pet. I love animals. Animals are great. They take care of themselves and they eat all their kibble, and when they shit all over your stuff, at least they do it cutely. I do not understand you. Now more than ever, Darren said, gazing at Rhys like he was some alien being. It's a culture thing. Kids suck where I'm from. They're probably much less horrific here. You guys probably still have the village concept and strong family bonds with multi-generational child-raising support. Plus, kids are value-added here, I bet, you know, help out around the farm, assist with cooking, take part in the handicrafts, instead of costing as much as a house just to push out into the world. And let's not even start talking about school, activities, clothes, food, and dear Lord, college, and you'd better pray to whatever you believe in that they don't get seriously sick. I mean, I imagine it's still hard, but boy howdy did we ever culture ourselves into some real bullshit when it came to child rearing. And don't even get me started on the mess that is mother-blaming culture and public schooling. To hear you describe your world, it was one step short of hell. Yeah, I felt that way a lot. Was there anything good in your world at all? Rhys thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers. Anime. Darren shook his head at Rhys. That is the right reaction. Well, you gotta remember, I got mistaken for a god of trash when I got yanked over here. My takes might be a bit hot. He was partially joking, anyways. There was more good in his world than just anime. There were novels, and live-action shows, and idols, singers, dancers, figurines, manga, comics, and of course, there were good things in the real world too, he was sure. Somewhere out there, there had to be something good. He'd spent all his life facing a computer in a tiny dark room, so how would he know? He was sure there were people who'd break down screaming to hear him describe the world so negatively, but that was the world he had experienced. Cruel, unfair, dark, and cold, uncaring about him or anyone else. An empty world where the only solace was to be found in the internet, and even then, it was full of scams, trash, and trolls. He lived in a world of plenty, where everyone was free to be as shit as they wanted to one another. Strangely, in this world, although he'd encountered more than his fair share of trash and trash people, he'd also encountered far more good people than someone as filthy as him had any right to. To name a few: Bast, Lyra, Sable, and Mouse. It stung, but he still thought it, and Mouse. She was a good person. He didn't know what had happened, that she'd been there on Virgil's side of things and hadn't mentioned her involvement to him, but he wasn't going to lose faith that easily. Something had happened. There was some other actor at play. Something that had forced her hand. He just had to figure out what. Rhys lifted his hand, calling the filth to him. For now, he targeted the ground and the air around him, lifting off what the pillar had spat out rather than targeting the pillar directly. The filth was deep set, so even absorbing what was around him took some time. The very dirt itself was partially made up of filth, all the way down 4 feet beneath him. He dragged it up, bit by bit, upending the earth as he did so. Some small plants and bushes were unearthed entirely as the filth ripped through them, and those he simply absorbed into himself. They were too tainted to leave around, but not filthy enough to put into the filth golem. He could fit a little bit more impurities and trash into the star, but a little, and a pillar of the densest impurities he'd ever come across were totally different. When he'd finished extracting all the impurities from the ground, the trees, and the air, he melded them into a small ball in front of him. Using the same technique he used in his trash star, he shredded, compressed, and refined the impurities to be beyond denser, even, than the pillar itself. The pillar was the densest impurity concentration he'd come across, yes, but he'd then learned the technique to concentrate his core further because of it, which was why he could now condense them tighter. That alone wasn't enough to create a golem, or else his trash star would have long since gained some semblance of sentience. There was something else to the process. Something Darren wasn't telling him. Fair enough, he'd harassed the man into teaching him the technique. He was lucky the guy hadn't deliberately told him something to sabotage his understanding. Then again, for all he knew, Darren had, but at the same time, he wasn't the kind of guy who'd follow the recipe to the letter. It made him a shit cook back home until he'd actually given in and followed the recipes for a while, but it made him a perfectly adequate mage here. He continued to absorb impurities into the ball in his hands while continuously monitoring the ball. It was dense and dark, and if he shaped it into a weapon, it would be the most dangerous, or at least most impure, weapon he'd ever created. Rhys thought for a second, then shifted his hands, reshaping the filth into a sword. Sure, he wanted a golem, but talking swords were classic trash. And his flexible poison sword was pog as hell, yeah, but he'd forged it at tier 3. It was already falling behind the meta. The meta was constantly moving, as he himself had said, and if he didn't constantly update his stuff, he'd fall behind. It wasn't like he couldn't use that sword anymore, but, well, why not make a new one? Then he could have a main sword and a backup sword on top of his instant creation intent sword that he usually used when he wasn't thinking about one of his better swords. He paused and sighed. I'm a guy who wants an iconic weapon, but who actually just abandons his gear for the better sword as soon as a better sword shows up. He was more like the character who, at level 1, had their iconic sword, but spent the rest of the game with stronger and more powerful swords that never appeared on the box art, rather than the guy who had his ultimate weapon on the box art and used its base form the whole game while constantly upgrading or building toward it. Sure, the concept of the trash intent sword could be seen as his iconic weapon, but if he were going to draw it, he had no idea what the first half of the sword would look like. Too many swords had taken that spot, and in the future, many more swords would take it yet. Of course, there was always the sun sword, still hidden away in his inventory, but that didn't count. He wasn't using it. At this point, he was going to die or become a god before he used it. I'm just not confident enough in my reforging powers to fix it, he thought with a sigh. And given the poisonous and impure direction his reforging techniques were going, he might never be able to repair it. The ball of impurities trembled in his hands, threatening to ignite or break apart. He shook his head and turned his attention back to the task at hand. I can worry about the sun sword later. For now, my golem. He approached the pillar slowly, absorbing more and more of its filth and packing it into the sword shape. No matter how much he packed in, though, it remained nothing more than a lump of impurities. A highly dense, deadly lump of impurities, that few but Rhys could handle and survive, but a lump of impurities all the same. It wasn't a sword. It had no form, no elegance. It looked more like a long sausage than a blade. Rhys looked at it for a long moment, then reached into his trash star. He pulled out a hammer without a head from his useful garbage pile, and a lump of metal from his trash star. The metal lump was metal he'd shredded and condensed into his core, which had subsequently melted down into a lump once again under the heat of the star's flames. The metals were sourced from 1,000 places and 1,000 objects, and for that matter, composed of 100 different types of metal and alloys. It was just a lump. No shape or definition to it, and if it had had an intent, then the 1,000 different intents had all mushed together, been melted down, and mingled for so long that there wasn't any intent attached to the metals anymore. It had almost left the realm of trash and re-entered the realm of raw materials. Almost. But it was still a worthless alloy, made up of too many metals with too many clashing properties to serve any purpose, so that lump of metal was still firmly trash. And therefore, Rhys imposed his will upon it. The metal shuddered as Rhys reached out to it. It was formless, purposeless. There was nothing left of its original form. But that was fine, because Rhys was here. He could give it purpose. Give it form. And so, a faint blue aura appeared around the lump. It stood upright, starting to understand Rhys's goal for it. More. He didn't just need it to understand a little. He needed it to take on his will as its own. Over and over, he repeated its purpose to it, forcing it into every crack and weld of the lump, willing it to take on a new shape, a new purpose. The blue aura grew denser, and the metal itself shuddered. It began to deform, then popped into place, standing upright, valiantly taking on the aura of an anvil. It wasn't the nicest anvil, or the biggest, or the strongest, but it would do for now. He activated intent on his hammer and gave it a few experimental swings, and was surprised yet gratified to find out that the two striking made the classic clang of hammer on anvil. His tools were ready. Now, for the next step. Rhys pulled out a bracelet and quickly attached it to the void, then inserted the sword through it, into the void, and back into his core, where he roasted it over the flames of his core, then pulled the red-hot impurities out and struck them on the anvil, forging them into a true impure sword. Rather than using the heat and the strikes to force out impurities, he used them to force more in. He'd used heat and friction to condense his impure star in the first place, so why not use the same to create his sword? The whole time, he kept mana flowing through the blade. That was the only hint Darren had told him, and he wasn't sure if it was accurate or not, but it was all he had to go on. It took him some effort to transfer his trash-based cultivation into mana, but he did it anyways. Even he hadn't been able to start off on his magehood journey without some mana to get things moving. Mana was the key to everything, it was the spark that started the engine. Even though car engines didn't run on electricity, but instead a disgustingly horrifying toxic gunk called gasoline, they still needed an electricity-powered spark plug to get started. That was exactly where Rhys was. He was running on gasoline, but the presumably future filth golem sword was still going to need some mana to kick itself off. There, under the dark aura of the filth pillar, Rhys forged his filth sword. Sucking in impurities and forcing them into the sword with each swing of his hammer, he heated the blade under the heat of a trash fire and forged it on a trash anvil with a trash hammer. Over and over, beating more and more filth into the sword, until it trembled under its own weight, struggling to not crumble to pieces. It was built of only filth, of the things people usually forced out of swords, impurities and trash. Rhys could hold it together with his intent, but the horribly misforged sword couldn't hold itself together otherwise. But that's not what I want. Rhys surged his energy, forcing more mana into the sword. He burned his trash core hotter so that he could generate more mana to feed the impurities. At the same time, he forced his intent on the sword, but not in the usual way. Instead, he reached out to the sword itself, to the nascent thing he was building on this spot. You are a sword. You want to cut. You want to be filthy. Over and over, as if he was hypnotizing the sword, beating the mantra into it with every swing of the hammer and every mode of mana he poured into it. For a long time, that was all there was. Rhys, beating the sword into shape, forcing impurities and mana into it in equal quantities to make it yet filthier and hold all that filth together, silently repeating a mantra over and over to the sword. The sun set, and the sun rose again, and still he beat at the sword, not yet satisfied. There was still plenty of filth in the pillar. The sword was still just a bad sword, and not a fantastic filth weapon yet. Weeks passed. Months. Rhys was locked into his technique, focused only on building the sword. He lost all track of time. His trash star burned low, and he started to absorb impurities once more to power it. Still, the sword remained inert, sticking around in its intentless form, no more than a lump of impurities and garbage. His awareness had narrowed to nothing but the sword and the filth pillar. There was nothing else in his world at all. Just him and the sword, and the mantra. He was stuck. There was a bottleneck blocking his way. A pinch point that he couldn't break through. He could beat the sword forever, but he couldn't make any more progress that way. He needed something else. Something more. He lifted his head and turned. The filth pillar exuded filth across the way from him, steadily working a way to impurify the mountain. Rhys's eyes shone. He picked up his anvil, hammer, and sword, and leapt to the filth pillar itself. He tucked the anvil away and set the sword directly on the filth pillar, using the pillar as the anvil to form the sword. But that wasn't enough. There was something missing. Something that wasn't there. He narrowed his eyes at the sword, then realized, the hammer. The hammer wasn't filthy enough. He put it away as well and reached down, clenching a handful of the filth pillar directly. His hand was immediately infected by impurities, but he paid it no mind. It wasn't important right now. He hammered the sword with the filth hammer, on the anvil of filth. Now every strike couldn't help but drive more impurities into it. It grew stronger. He came to the verge of the bottleneck, on the very brink of breaking through, but he still couldn't take that final step. There was still something limiting the sword's growth, still something blocking its way from becoming a true filth sword. He just couldn't figure out what. And then his eyes flashed. No, I know what it is. He gripped the sword and heated it once more, putting it over his trash star to heat it up, then pulled it free and plunged it into the filth pillar. Placing his hands on the outside of the pillar, he forced it inward, pushing all the filth into the sword. The sword trembled, struggling to contain all the impurities. Still Rhys kept pushing, repeating his mantra, feeding it mana. A little more. Just a little more, and then the sword shook, and it began sucking the impurities in. A feeble heartbeat emanated from the sword, repeating his mantra back at him. It pulled the pillar inward, 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 like the trash star, shredding and compressing the impurities under Rhys's guidance. It absorbed everything, sinking into the earth as it chased after the impurities buried under the ground. Rhys let it go, keeping the sword in his consciousness. It absorbed wildly, absorbing the filth pillar even more quickly than he could. He kept feeding it, kept repeating the mantra, but the bottleneck had been broken. The sword was working on its own, and now it was able to grow strong on its own, at the same time that Rhys could strengthen it. It grew explosively. All the impurities around them hurtled toward it, bursting out of the ground, the plants, the air. The pillar vanished, consumed by the sword. And then it leapt out of the earth and laid at Rhys's feet. Rhys knelt. It looked like an ordinary sword, except the blade was dark, far darker than usual. He reached out and touched the sword. The sword leapt into his hand. It pulled at his body, sucking the impurities out. The black marks on his hand from where he'd handled the filth pillar vanished, and so did the filth hammer he still held, and still the sword sucked at him, seeking more. He was full of impurities, and the sword hungered. Rhys pushed back. No, he was the sword's master. The sword didn't control him. Though, to be quite honest, it was kind of cute. He was tier 4, after all, and the sword had just been born. Sure, he'd forged it, and he'd forged it at tier 4, but Rhys was an old fox compared to the baby sword. He pulled back, refusing to let it have impurities, and it pulled at him, but it was something like the sensation of a small dog jumping at his leg, trying to get the meat he held in his hand. It was never going to get it, and though annoying, it was an adorable kind of annoying. Come on, I know where more impurities are, he told it. At that, the sword stilled and stopped pulling at him. More impurities. Like this place. Even better than this place. If he could take it somewhere like that, then, the sword went still, no longer sucking at Rhys's impurities. Instead, it waited, full of an urgent hunger. Rhys patted it. He instantly liked this sword. It was simple, straightforward, and it was a lot like him, at heart. What should I call you, him? The hunger, the sword replied. Rhys pursed his lips. Not bad, but it is a bit of a mouthful. How do you feel about Hunji? The sword replied with vehement revulsion. All right, we can workshop it, Rhys promised. He leapt off the peak, hurtling toward the next one. There was no more filth pillar here, after all. He needed to move on to the next pillar already. For himself, if not for the sword. The hunger. Nah, we really need to workshop it. It's not edgy enough. Rhys leapt from tree to tree, hurtling toward the next peak. The hunger twitched in his hand, hungry for more impurities. He glanced at it. How about Trashcaliber? No. It's such a cool name. Okay. Trashamoon. Muratrasha. No. Filthandle. No. Joygunks. No. Okay, that one wasn't that good. No one cares about joys, anyways. Fuck Charlemagne. He pursed his lips, struggling to come up with more famous swords. It was moments like these that he truly needed a search engine. There were many more famous swords in the world, but he couldn't recall any of them at the moment, and that meant that he simply didn't have any more names to throw at the hunger. It wasn't that the hunger wasn't a good name. It was a fine name for a sword. If he was an edgy or devour-themed hero, it'd be a fantastic sword name. But he was trash-themed. He couldn't be running around with a cool sword like the hunger. People would just laugh at him. It was fine being trashy, as long as it was clear he was doing a theme, but being trashy and having a sword named the hunger. It was just barely cool, while not actually being so cool it worked. Basically, it was that thin line between successfully cool and weak-ass loser trying to be cool and failing, and without him leaning into the hunger, it landed hard on, try-hard uncool. He respected the sword's right to name itself. He did. Everyone should have that right, even though few did. But no one else would know the sword had named himself, and so as a result, it made him look so lame. Rhys took a deep breath. He couldn't come up with any other names anyways, so it was looking like he'd have to live with the hunger. It was kind of growing on him, at the end of the day. It did bother him that it wasn't on theme, and in fact, it was totally against his theme, but whatever. No, wait, it is on theme, Rhys realized belatedly. The hunger. It was a great name. It was exactly the kind of chunabu name a revenger deuteragonist would give his sword in a shonen manga, and doubly so if it was a shonen comedy making fun of the chunny revenger. Never mind. You have a great name, the hunger. Or is it hunger? Seriously, can I call you Hunji? It is great. And no. A part of him squealed in glee at the hunger's cold attitude. Excellent. Nothing like a Tsunere chunny sword. He didn't know what he'd expected when he'd created his sword, but definitely not the hunger. He held it up, looking at it under the light of the sun. The body of the blade was dark, and hid 1,000 tiny shades of color in it. Copper, silver, gold, even stranger hues like reds and blacks, all of them beaten down to tiny specks and all melded together into a strange dark blade. The edge shone like oil, glimmering in a sickly tone that was, quite frankly, disgusting to the eye. He held it by the tang, because he hadn't yet bound it. It lacked a cross guard, grip, or any ornamentation or comfort. His hands darkened where he held it, inflicted with impurities just for touching it at all, and it occurred to him that he'd done another awesome thing, created a sword only he could hold. Ha ha ha. No, that's awesome. It's like that classic hero thing where only the hero can hold his sword, except it's because I made a sword of filth and it's stupid to hold it if you don't have super ultra anti-filth protection. Rhys nodded to himself, very pleased. You're an awesome sword, the hunger. I can't believe I built you, because you're so damn cool. There was a haughty harumph in his head. I am cool. And you didn't build me. I gave you the right to shape me. Oh, is that so? It is. Hey, the hunger. Can you talk aloud? Or is it purely in my head? There was a long pause. The sword in his hand trembled, then hummed. It rattled in his hand so hard it made his bones ache. I can. Like this. Ooh, that's awesome. Aw, man. If I didn't make you out of filth I could make so much money selling replicas. Why would you want to make me out of anything else? For horrible, filthy, adult reasons that would make me so much money. Rhys cleared his throat. But that's neither here nor there. We're coming up on it, the hunger. Are you ready? Ready. For what? For you to do what you do best. More impurities. What you do second best. The hunger paused. What's that? Rhys looked at it, then at the approaching mages, who raced through the trees toward him. You're about to find out. The mages closed in on them. Rhys paused atop a tree, holding it between the flats of his feet, and raised his free hand. Stop. You know not the might of that which I hold. Surrender now, lest I loose this foul blade upon you. The lead mage laughed, thrusting his sword at Rhys. Ha, you're after the pillar, aren't you? We've seen what you've done to those other 2 peaks. Stand down, or we'll end your foul breath. It's not that bad, Rhys said, taken aback, then gave an evil grin and called up some trash gas. See. Despite everything, the mage paused, confused, and then the gas struck him, and he reeled back, waving his hand, then screaming as his flesh began to melt. The other mages sped up, hurtling at him, their blades screeching from their hilts. I did warn you. Rhys rushed to meet them. He met the first mage, and their blades met with a faint grunt from the hunger. And then the other mage's blade crumbled from the hunger's impurities, and he struck through, all the way to the mage's heart. Impurities burst outward from where the hunger struck, so that not a single droplet of the mage's blood flowed. Instead, it was corrupted to filth before it so much as oozed from the wound, so that all that emerged was a puff of dark powder. The mage stared down in horror as his body steadily blackened outward, but he only had a brief breath to do it before his entire body became nothing but a big lump of impurities. Holy shit, Rhys thought, not sure whether to settle on shock, horror, or awe. Impurities. The hunger shouted in joy, and eagerly swallowed them up. It paused, then turned its attention to Rhys. So what do I do second best? That's, Rhys thought for a second about explaining life, violence, and death to an inanimate object he'd only recently gifted, or cursed, with life itself, then reconsidered. You know, you're doing a great job. The hunger twisted in his hand, a little confused by his answer, but mostly was pleased to be praised. And then there was no more time to talk, as the other mages closed in on them. Rhys swung the hunger. It ached in his palm, the tang deeply unpleasant to fight with, but every foe it struck fell. Their spells, their defenses, their bodies, everything crumbled before the hunger, then was drawn in by its powerful impurity magnetism. Rhys sucked some of the impurities off the top, which the hunger tolerated, not that he cared. He was the master, and the hunger was his sword. It was better that they got along than didn't, of course, but the hunger was not in control. At the end of the day, it wasn't his problem if the hunger didn't want to share, it would be sharing anyways, because Rhys said so. Is this what it feels like to be a parent? He swung the hunger again, and another mage fell and vanished into his and the hunger's cores. Rhys looked around, searching for the next enemy, but no one remained. He'd killed all of them. They'd killed all of them. That wasn't more impurities, the hunger remarked. No, that wasn't what I was talking about. Those people were trying to keep me from bringing you to the impurities, Rhys told it truthfully. The hunger thought for a moment, then gave off the sensation of nodding. Why were they trying to keep us from the impurities? Some really complicated human politics bullshit. The hunger frowned. I don't recognize those words. That's probably for the best. The barrier on the third peak loomed. Rhys went to open it using his pillar technique, then looked at the hunger. He shrugged, then swung it at the barrier. Gold light flashed. The barrier resisted the hunger, while the hunger pushed impurities into it. The two clashed. The barrier was made of pure mana, while the hunger was pure impurities. The hunger struggled to find an inroads, but at the same time, it didn't care. It kept pushing against the barrier with a hunger, a drive, that Rhys himself rarely possessed. The barrier struggled. It flashed, bright, then dark, bright, then dark, then crumbled. The hunger swung into the empty space behind. No one rushed out. Rhys extended his mana senses as far as he could, but the peak was dark. There was no life remaining upon it. Even from here, with his combined mana and trash senses, he could sense what had happened to the original students. Bodies laid under the sun, rotting away without so much as a burial. He pressed his lips together, disapproving, and strode forward. He extended his hand and called the bodies to it. Better to put them to good use than let them rot here. At least I don't have to feel guilty about those mages I killed. They'd been defending this peak. That meant they'd been the ones to kill the students who were actually learning from this peak. Whatever they'd been originally, they'd become murderers the second they'd decided to destroy everyone who lived on this peak. Impurities, the hunger complained. Yes, we're getting there. You can sense them, can't you? To his surprise, the hunger answered, sense. Sense, right. Like mana senses, or anything like that. He paused. Wait, can you even see? Of course I can see. The hunger sounded insulted. Hey, you don't have eyes. It was a valid question. Still, he'd gained valuable information here. The hunger couldn't sense impurities. If it ever tried to get too uppity, or made a play to become the master of their relationship, that was something he could use against it. Not that he thought it would. It was just that it was always good to plan against talking swords, in case they started thinking too much. And, of course, Soma had betrayed Darren, so he was thinking about betrayal. And, well, which Chunny Revenger didn't eventually betray his friends? It was just a good thing to look out for. He wasn't going to be blindsided by such an obvious twist. And maybe he was just a little bothered by the whole mouse situation. Who was to say? Anyway, you can just rely on me for that, he said, heading toward the peak. Good. The hunger thrummed with excitement, already anticipating its next meal. They reached the peak in no time, with no one to bar their way. The pillar was no less impure than the other two had been. Rhys and the hunger competed to absorb the most impurities, with the hunger possessing a near boundless, well, hunger for them, and Rhys's trash star running low after he'd spent so much to forge the hunger. This time, the pillar vanished almost before Rhys knew it, what with him and the hunger splitting the load. He leapt off, rushing toward the fourth peak. It wasn't that he'd forgotten that Tier 4 people could fly. It was just that he didn't want to reveal his strength level. If he went flying around everywhere, idiots like those mages who had fallen to the hunger wouldn't charge him recklessly and die. They'd be slower to attack, or they might plot and set traps, or immediately launch their ultimate attacks from afar. Instead, if he ran around like a Tier 3 or lower mage, then no one would think anything of him, and they'd attack and die like fools. Plus, there was no elegance in just flying around everywhere. He didn't know what to do with his hands and feet when he was flying. He didn't have to think about it when he was just running around. Then he had to use his hands and feet to run, and he could just look like he was running, instead of trying to figure out if he should glide elegantly at a lie down, fly around like Superguy with his hands straight out, or stand up and fly around upright, which seemed like the worst option but also maybe the most normal. It wasn't like lying helped him fly, or anything. He could fly at any angle. Standing, sitting, lying down, even upside down and backward, if he really wanted, and that was a lot more thinking than he liked to do for his mobility. The second he reached the base of the fourth and final peak, he came to a halt. Something was different about this peak. Even without scanning it with his senses, something told him he was in danger. All the hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end, and he felt fear like he had rarely felt since he'd reached Tier 3, let alone 4. He extended his mana senses, filth senses, all of them, and sensed nothing. Not a single living thing remained on the peak. No students, no protectors, no schoolmaster. The barrier was broken, and though the other peaks had glittered here and there with low-level artifacts that didn't deeply interest him, this one was completely dead. There was nothing. Nothing at all. Rhys gulped. Don't like that. You sense anything funny, the hunger? No. Yeah, I didn't expect much. In the first place, infants usually didn't have a great sense of self-preservation, and the hunger had just confessed that it couldn't even sense impurities, the one thing it should definitely be able to sense. Be on guard. Danger approaches. In a rare moment of awareness, the hunger asked, aren't we the ones approaching danger? Yeah, but that doesn't sound as cool. HMPH. Rhys kept his head on a swivel as he climbed toward the peak. There weren't bodies lying everywhere like there had been on the previous peak, nor was there any sign of a struggle. The buildings looked pristine, if abandoned. There was nothing to indicate what had happened to the people living on this peak. In fact, it looked almost as if they'd simply up and left one day, peacefully abandoning everything they'd been building up for no clear reason at all. It made his stomach twist with anticipation, and to some extent, he was expecting some kind of zombie or monster to leap out at him from behind every corner, even though he could see in his mana, filth, and cursed energy senses that there was nothing there. He tightened his grip on the hunger, then winced as the tang dug into his palm. Turning toward his core, he sifted through his useful trash pile until he found a few pieces of wood and a good sturdy length of leather, then bound a simple hilt to the hunger. Naturally, the hilt instantly darkened as the hunger's mere presence filled it with impurities, but under Rhys's trash skills and trash intent, it didn't completely erode away. The hunger reached out, feeling the new binding, then did the sword equivalent of shrugging, and the erosion slowed greatly, even beyond what Rhys could do to it. Rhys raised his brows. Huh. So the hunger could control the erosion, to some extent. Interesting. Nothing else impure he'd encountered could ever do that, but then, nothing else he'd ever encountered had been impure and had a consciousness, so it wasn't like he had a fair comparison point. At last, the impure pillar loomed before him. Rhys slowed, looking at it, then froze entirely. He stared, holding his breath, afraid to make a sound. What? There are the impurities. Let's eat them, the hunger said. Shish, Rhys whispered, but it was too late. It had been too late, even when he'd been being quiet, but at least he'd given the figure an excuse to ignore him as it continued working to build the final filth pillar. Now, it couldn't pretend to have not noticed him, and it turned, slowly, abandoning its work. Contrary to his expectations, the figure was delicate, almost pretty, with clean skin and bright, clear eyes. No, wait, I didn't do that right. It had skin so clear that if you squeezed it, dew would come out, as pale as jade, and eyes like blackest ink, with hair like silk and I've run out of overused descriptives. Come on, come on. There's gotta be something. All that to say that the figure was extremely beautiful. At a glance, it was hard to tell whether it was male or female, since its features were so fine and fair. Long black hair fell around its shoulders, cropped around its face in a Heim cut, and when it smiled at Rhys, it lit up the world around it. Its robes were the finest Rhys had ever seen, even compared to Virgil's purple and gold affair, with thick cream fabric edged tastefully in gold, with gold ornaments and tassels. A gold choker held a single red ruby to their throat, which only served to further accentuate their perfect skin. Rhys realized he'd been staring, to the figure's delight, and cleared his throat. Soma, I presume. Oh my. You know me, and yet, I don't believe we've met. You have me at a disadvantage. Soma touched the ruby at his throat and smiled. God, you're hot. You know, the person I spoke to didn't mention that, Rhys told him, removing Darren's name at the last second. It probably wasn't a good idea to draw attention to the fact that he was kind of aligned with the guy Soma had betrayed. Why, thank you. Most men try to resist my charms. I like the chase, but I like an honest man, too. Soma bit his lip, drawing attention to its perfectly ruby tones. Damn you, femboys, for being too powerful. Rhys shrugged. No point denying it. You clearly take a lot of joy in your appearance. I do. And yet, though I confess that I do appreciate the compliments, I'd appreciate a name as well. Rhys Foundling. I don't suppose you've heard of me, Rhys said hopefully. But of course. Rhys Foundling. You're the talk of the Alliance, you know. My. Rhys Foundling in the flesh. You know, to hear them speak of you, I expected some filthy, disgusting gremlin. Instead, you're quite palatable. That makes two of us, then, Rhys said, crossing his arms. Darren could have mentioned something. It seemed worth bringing up, especially when Straw was pretty much just a normal-looking guy, if anything, unattractive, for a mage, and Sid, though perfectly acceptable in appearance and strikingly terrifying in a final boss kind of way, wasn't any more handsome than any other mage of his power. After those two, how was Rhys supposed to expect a once-in-a-generation beauty? It seemed like something to mention. Soma wasn't his type, of course, but damn. He felt like he hadn't been properly forewarned. So you're the one who's been taking down those pillars I spent so much time on, then? Soma asked. Rhys tightened his grip on the hunger. That's right, I am. Soma looked at him, then raised a brow. Do you know what lies at the center of the 4 pillars? Nope, but I was excited to find out. Soma laughed. You know, you were supposed to find this later. This is Virgil's grand trap for you. Set 4 pillars that you struggle to clear and weaken your self-absorbing, with the ultimate prize at the center. I'm sure you can imagine who. A million options ran through Rhys's head: Bast, Mouse, Sable, Lyra, the raccoon, the rats, and he shook his head. Nope. Soma sighed deeply. Ah, a life well lived, with many loved ones and connections. What if I gave you a little hint? He's your mentor, the one who truly introduced you to magehood. Rhys's heart jolted in his chest. He stepped forward. Straw was here, right here, in the center of the formation he was breaking at this very moment. The man he'd been looking for nearly since he'd become a mage, right here. Soma snapped. The very same. He paused. Of course, the trap isn't set yet. Rhys's heart fell. Of course not. Why bait a trap until it was completely set up? For that matter, why put the bait in the trap at all, when Rhys would have no way of confirming whether Straw was present or not until he examined the trap, at which point it would already be too late. He was the idiot for getting his hopes up. Unaware of Rhys's mood swings, Soma chattered on. And just like I told that fool, if you're truly able to do the things he said, then pillars of impurity are no problem for you. But that big-headed idiot, of course he knows better than me. Just like that stupid demon king. Just because I'm pretty, they think I can't understand anything. I don't think that's the problem, Rhys thought quietly to himself. It probably had more to do with the fact that remnant weapons were, well, weapons, meant to be ordered and wielded, by their very name themselves. Sid and Straw were both compliant enough, Sid shockingly so, though Rhys still felt like he'd escaped that encounter with all four limbs and his head by the very skin of his teeth. But Soma truly had a mind of his own, and desires of his own, which clearly Darren, and now Virgil, did not truly align with. Soma wanted to be pretty, and surround himself with beautiful and valuable things, the finer things in life, like Darren had said. Virgil had clearly bought him to his side without fully understanding what that meant. Or rather, Virgil had thought it was a purchase, a transaction that had gone through and been fully processed, and that was it, when Soma clearly had seen it as a one-time purchase that needed to be continuously re-upped. To put it another way, Virgil thought he'd bought a car, but he'd only signed on to a lease, and he had to continuously pay every month if he wanted to keep the car. But he never truly owned it, even if he did keep paying, because the car belonged to the company, or in this case, had a mind of its own. The metaphor's a bit tortured, okay. Nothing I can do about it. But the point was, Soma clearly didn't see Rhys as the enemy, the way Virgil wanted him to. And that meant that there was room for negotiation. Rhys looked at Soma. Do you like working for Virgil? Or would you rather work for you? Soma asked cattishly, clearly disgusted by the idea. Yourself. Rhys finished. At that, Soma's eyes lit up. He lifted a hand to his mouth, but he couldn't hide the smile that spread across his lips. Oh my. You do know what I like. Rhys spread his hands. Listen, I don't have any problem with you, and you don't seem to have a problem with me. No, not at all. But we both have a problem with Virgil. True. Of varying sizes, Soma allowed. Of varying sizes. So listen, what if we play a joke on Virgil instead? Rhys asked. Soma's eyes narrowed. I'm not childish, like Sid. We weapons are not all the same. Oh, no, of all people, I know well how different you three are. No, this isn't a childish joke. I think you'll approve, it's something I've done before, and I'll do it again before I die. Listen. Soma listened, one perfect brow cocked curiously. In Rhys's hand, the hunger trembled hungrily, its eyes, or whatever part of it saw, locked on the partially formed filth pillar. Rhys ignored it for the time being. The adults were talking. The child would have to wait. I like the way you think, but I've got this icky mark on me, Soma said, lowering his robes in a way that Rhys chose not to interpret as flirtatious. I can take care of that. Really? He pursed his lips in disbelief. Yeah, and stop looking at me like that. Like what? Rhys raised his brows. Soma blinked back at him, then giggled. Oh, fine, I'll be good. Soma was tickling something in the back of Rhys's mind. His otherworldly beauty, his overly flirtatious manner, he recognized these traits. They usually weren't directed at other men or, he suspected, at whoever was nearest and also in possession of a beating heart, but he did recognize the traits nonetheless. Do you have a harem? Rhys asked. Soma gasped. How rude. A harem. I would never. I'm a fine, upstanding, modern citizen. Oh, sorry. You just gave me those vibes. Do I have a harem? No. I have several consenting live-in partners who are all aware of one another, yes, but a harem. Honestly, a harem. Ridiculous. It's a polycule. We're modern. Rhys opened his mouth, feeling like Soma had deeply insulted several non-traditional romance enjoyers, as the term was originally defined, and not the way it was perverted in its later round as NTR, then shut it. I'll just let him have that one. In any case, I am contractually bound to battle you and bring you in, or else die. If the mark is removed, Virgil will know. Virgil knows everything about the marks. Soma looked at Rhys meaningfully. And he trusts them. Rhys widened his eyes, instantly understanding. If he could edit, instead of remove, Soma's mark so that the man was no longer obligated to fight him, without removing the mark, then Virgil would believe that Soma had not yet encountered him. That would blind Virgil to the actual truth, whether Rhys was there or not. Virgil didn't believe his men. He didn't trust his underlings. The only person he trusted was himself, and by extension, the marks he'd inflicted on everyone under him. But that meant that if Rhys was able to undermine those marks, Virgil would continue to trust whoever he'd marked, because he believed in his marks, and he believed that they could not be overcome. Interesting, Rhys said thoughtfully. It was a fascinating concept. If he could exploit that, he'd be able to essentially turn all Virgil's men against him. So, I can remove it, but edit it, that's a little beyond my capabilities, Rhys said. Soma sighed. That's unfortunate. Unless you'd be willing to let me experiment with it. Soma looked at Rhys. Do you think that's a good idea? Rhys shrugged. I dunno. Do you have some underlings you don't particularly like? Some ex-lovers you're well and truly sick of? When you put it like that. Soma went to walk away, then froze. I don't think I can leave here without fighting you. The compulsion is that strong. It was always good to learn more about how the mark functioned, so that he knew what he could do around Bast, and how much he could trust his friend. Soma shrugged and smiled mysteriously. Can't tell me, huh? Rhys nodded. What if we go get your underling while fighting? Soma blinked at him. Right. You don't have to fight to kill. We can just fight to fight. The sword in Rhys's hand shuddered particularly hard. Hungry. Shish. The adults are negotiating, Rhys whispered. Well, that's true, Soma said slowly. But a high-tier fight is splashy and attention-grabbing. If we fought, and I didn't kill you, then Virgil would know, and know that I failed. I'd be in poor standing either way, whether he suspected me or not, and your plan wouldn't work anymore. What if we don't fight splashily, but just spar enough to satisfy the mark? Another mysterious smile. That's a no-go, too. Unfortunate. He frowned for a moment, then snapped his fingers. We're talking now, right? I'm not compelled to fight you the second I see you, no. What if we keep talking, all the way over to your disposable manpower? At that, Soma finally raised his brows and thought for a moment. Slowly, he said, I think I can do that. Can you do it without flirting with me? A deep sigh. That's a big ask. That's fine, that's fine. You can flirt a little. Oh, that's not permission. I heard permission. You heard wrong. Soma laughed lightly. He pointed at the hunger. What about the little one? Hungry. The hunger bellowed. Rhys gave him an embarrassed glance. Oh, he's an experiment I was trying out. He wants to eat the impure pillar. Eat? Soma asked, startled. Yeah, you want to see? Rhys offered. Soma gestured for him to go ahead. Rhys stepped forward. The hunger bucked in his hand, excited to get to the pillar. He set the sword on the pillar and stepped away. Before he'd stepped away, before he'd done much more than putting it on the pillar, the hunger surged into the pillar, greedily sucking in the impurities. A few sprayed around it, which Rhys quietly absorbed as the sword rushed on ahead. In the space of a handful of seconds, the sword had buried deep into the pillar, then sucked it in, leaving no hint of its existence but a hole in the ground. Rhys held out his hand, and the hunger leapt back to it. It thrummed faintly with excitement from having had such an excellent meal. Oh my, what a curious creature, Soma said, peering closer at the hunger. He glanced at Rhys. May I? Rhys held the hunger out, then hesitated. He's basically made of impurities. He will impurify you. It's not an attack, it's just his very being. Soma blinked at him, slowly. For the space of a single heartbeat, Rhys caught a glimpse of a horrifying monster made of filth and everything hideous in the world, and then it was gone again, replaced with the extraordinarily beautiful Soma. Right. Yes. I don't know who I thought I was talking to, Rhys said, and handed the sword over. I appreciate your gentlemanly instincts, though. Much better than that ruffian Virgil. Soma took the hunger in both hands, holding it out flat, carefully, as if it was a priceless artifact. His hands darkened, but only for a split second. He narrowed his eyes, and veins stood out on his perfect skin. The impurities vanished, and Rhys got the strange sensation that the hunger had backed down, as if it were cringing away in fear, as if it had caught a glimpse of an older, stronger version of itself. It was almost like it was a small dog, barking loudly, who ran into a big dog off the leash and suddenly became very quiet. How curious. It's almost like a prototype of myself, Soma murmured to himself, turning it over in his hands. Sensing the opportunity to use another of his favorite stock lines, Rhys quickly jumped in, I wouldn't dare compare it to your esteemed radiance. Soma chuckled and waved his hand at Rhys in an, oh, you, sort of way. He looked Rhys up and down. And you can handle it without taking any damage. Yeah. Rhys didn't say any more. He didn't want to give too much away to the one man who could probably guess his path. Soma looked him up and down again and bit his lip, and Rhys realized, suddenly, that the man's mind was going in a very different direction. I mean, no. Rhys, dear. You know, there are shapeshifting techniques out there. Oh, I know. I mean, you and me, whatever you like, no. Whoever you like. What did I say about flirting? This isn't flirting. This is business. Rhys sighed. Business is closed. What a pity. You know, I have to be very careful usually. I'm a dangerous person to touch. He offered Rhys his hand. Rhys hesitated, a little worried it was a trap, then delicately touched Soma's palm. Immediately, he understood. Impurities slammed into him, blackening his flesh as bad, no, worse than the hunger. Rhys desperately sucked in, barely able to maintain a 0 point against the influx of impurities from Soma. And then Soma took a deep breath. Veins stood out on his forehead for a second, then vanished, and the impurities stopped flowing. Rhys retracted his hand. Wow, do you know how many years it took for me to reach that point? He shook his head. I can't imagine. Centuries. Soma looked at his own hand. Centuries before I was able to touch another living being without killing it. Before I was able to hold something beautiful without making it hideous. I spend every waking moment desperately withholding my strength in the hopes that I don't harm the things and people I care for. Rhys looked at him, and for the first time, he felt like he was seeing the real man behind the beautiful exterior and the flirty demeanor. There was sorrow in his eyes, mixed with a quiet, desperate longing, and he realized what it meant, at last, for Soma to have a taste for the finer things in life. Soma was an impure golem, a being made of filth and impurities, who exuded filth everywhere he went whether he wanted to or not. The finer things in life were contrary to his very being. It wasn't just that he wanted what Darren didn't want him to have, or that he had a mind of his own. Deeply, desperately, he wanted to be able to do what Rhys could do without thinking, to touch someone else, to admire a gem without shattering it, to eat a delicious meal without turning it to filth in his mouth. It wasn't an unreasonable or ridiculous thing to want, it was a simple, pure desire, one that Rhys could understand without having to think hard about it. At his core, Soma wanted a good life. A normal life. A life where he could enjoy the things that everyone else in the world could enjoy, without having to constantly remain aware of himself and restrain himself to avoid destroying them. To live an entire life like that, standing in the trash while gazing at all that was good and pure, and knowing that you could never have it. A painful, empty, hollow life. His heart ached for Soma, but then he realized, this wasn't a tragedy. It was a story of conquest. Soma had overcome that. It might be hard for him, but he had become able to enjoy the fine things in life. Even if it took constant effort, he had still overcome his weakness, and he could continue to fight and overcome it into the future. You can touch your lovers now, though, so don't act like I'm your only refuge, Rhys said, crossing his arms in mock crossness. Yes, but there's a difference between holding back and truly letting yourself go, you know. Soma said, fluttering his lashes. Rhys nodded blankly. Yes, I, Rhys, sex heaver, understand this statement. Soma paused, and his eyes lit up. Rhys, don't tell me. I haven't told you anything. Oh dear. Oh my pure, sweet child. I didn't know. You are a treat. You don't know anything. Soma chuckled. It's okay, darling. We can take it slow. Gesturing, he indicated for Rhys to follow him. Let's get back to my hair, my men before you tempt me too much. Rhys snapped his head around. It is a harem. You don't know anything. Soma chuckled, and Rhys felt like he had a different meaning than Rhys had had. I take back all the pity I felt toward you. That's okay. I don't want you feeling pity. There's lots of other things we can feel. Together. Stop waggling those eyebrows. I don't know what you're talking about. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.